like almost every year, like if you're in the corporate world or you're working and whatever else, basically every year, whether you're moving companies or not, you're going to have the salary conversation. The organization is going to decide using whatever metric they feel like using that this is how much you're going to be increased by. This is how much your salary is going up by, 3%, 2%, whatever the number may be. But what I've been thinking about is within your career, this is a conversation that's going to happen at least once a year. For as long as you're in the workforce, it's going to happen once a year. You're going to be reviewed. There's going to be all sorts of things. But I think most of us are so ill prepared for the conversation that even when it comes to having that conversation, whether it's with your current employer or with a prospective employer, you get so uncomfortable. Like you'll be asked, so what's your current cost to company or what's your expected salary and whatever. And most of us will not have an answer. Like you will actually not be able to, one, say what you feel you should be making, but two, be able to justify why that number is the number that you've made or the number that you've given. And that works against you. Like over the past few weeks, I've spent a lot of time posting on LinkedIn about salaries and whatever else. And you see from the responses how, lack of a better word, disgruntled people actually are about how much they're being paid, or specifically by the recruitment process. But many of them feel so powerless in that process. They feel like they actually cannot say anything about how things are actually done. And that doesn't make a lot of sense to me because on one end, you've got people that continually talk about make sure you get paid what you're worth and whatever else, know your worth. But one of the things that I'm slowly coming to see, especially within a corporate context, is you don't get paid what you're worth. You get paid what you're willing to fight for. So in the context of most people, they wish that it would be as simple as a company disclosing to them, this is the budget for the role, and this is how much we will pay you if you actually meet the minimum requirements for the role. And what like, we all like in an ideal world, that's how it would work because then it eliminates the need for negotiation. It eliminates this uneasiness that we tend to feel when it comes to talking about money. But I think the person was a recruiter or something like that. You actually said that probably will only happen in like 10% of cases. In other words, 90% of the time, that's not what's going to happen. You're actually going to have to find yourself um, not necessarily arguing, but building an argument for the case or stating your case for why you should be increased by this amount. Because for me, when I think about increases, or even my own personally, is if an organization comes to me and says, um, we will, let's say perhaps it's my current employer, we're going to give you an 8% increase. My thought about it will constantly be, am I actually 8% better than what I was a year ago? Because for me, it's not about conning your current employer or your prospective employer out of giving you the highest possible amount who's that you can't even justify. I don't believe in that. For me, it's primarily about what value do you actually bring to the teams you're a part of? And if you're a person that, like me, you're constantly trying to improve, you're reading the books, you're taking the online courses and whatever else. In my case, if I were to receive, let's say, an 8%, to me, that would seem unjustified. I would feel shortchanged because I would have to look at that in proportion to the amount of improvement I've actually made. I would have to look at that in proportion to how much I've actually grown, how many more problems I'm now able to solve, how many problems I've actually solved over the course of the year, and whatever else, which were tricky problems that perhaps no one else could solve in the organization, depending on what the issues actually were. So I would think about it within that context, and that's what has helped me personally. Is if I have to think about um, salary by just numbers like zeros and ones, I struggle. I get very uncomfortable. But as soon as I move that conversation to a conversation on value, like how much value I've actually brought, if it's a prospective employer, how much value I will actually bring to your team, the types of solutions I would bring, because of the fact that I'm constantly a person that's trying to look for ways in which things can be improved and whatever else, you're going to have at least one more person, not knowing what's going on in your organization. But I know for a fact that if I were to join, you're going to have at least one more person who will constantly be looking at your processes, constantly looking at the projects you're working on, constantly looking at the different things and looking at how we could potentially improve that within my knowledge and skill sets. So when I think about it within the context of value, then I get a lot more confident. Then I start being able to argue for certain numbers. That's when I can actually say, well, no, 8% then is no longer fair for me, because I look at, well, this is one thing I've done, and this is the value that that's brought. This is another thing that I've done, and this is how much time it's actually saved us. We've been able to do this, we've improved on this, we've worked on this, and whatever. So when I start to pile up all of those things, I think it's Ramit Sethi who talks about the briefcase method, where you basically have, like, you are able to actually document. You don't only just document, but you're able to actually show that to either a current or a prospective employer why you believe you are worth the number that you are actually arguing for. So if you say to your employer you're worth 20% increase, let's say, you need to be able to justify why that's the case. Did you perhaps take on an online course that's now allowing you to solve problems within the organization that you weren't able to solve previously? Are you doing some other things? Like, what exactly, how do you justify the fact that you feel like you're worth whatever the number that you feel like you're worth? And I think a lot of us, we struggle with that. That's why we feel like, no, we should just be paid, like, just pay your people what they're worth. You're like, well, yes, in an ideal world, that's how it should be. But this is not an ideal world, unfortunately. And so most of the time, you're going to have to actually fight for what you feel like you're worth. You're going to have to actually argue. You're going to have to actually build an argument for why you feel like this is how much you should be paid. And the the easiest method that I've been able to find was from Jordan Peterson's book, 12 More Rules for Life, where I think he calls it Beyond Order, which is a really nice book. One of the rules, I think it's like rule 4 or something like that, where he says, treat yourself as though you are someone that you are responsible for helping. That as human beings, we're actually very bad at arguing for ourselves. Like, we're very bad at even taking care of ourselves. That's why, like, most people that, let's say, will find out they've got some form of chronic illness or whatever else, most people will actually not change their lifestyles. They will actually not even take the meds and whatever. So we're actually very poor at taking care of ourselves. But if those same people were to be asked, generally, like from the studies that he mentions, if they were to be asked how they would take care of a loved one, whether it's a spouse or a child and whatever, you find them saying, I would force them to take the meds. I'd make sure they're changing their diets and whatever. So you come back to realize that generally we tend to care more about the people we love and care about within our lives than we generally do about ourselves. So one of the things that I use even as a tactic for myself is that I think of my career and I think of the value that I bring within the context of my family. I think of that within the context of my kids and whatever else. And then it changes everything. Then you start to realize that I become a lot more aggressive. I become a lot more unwilling to settle for what I feel like I should be, let's say, earning or whatever else. And that changes the entire dynamic for me personally, because now I start to feel like, okay, here's essentially how I phrase it, that I could sit and not say anything about whatever the issue is, and this will cost me X amount if I don't ask for it. And if I do that, then I'm nowhere near closer towards giving my family this life that I want to give them. So I'm costing them this life because of my unwillingness to fight. That's essentially how I phrase it. So because of that, and because of this huge sense of responsibility that I feel towards my family and whatever else, that really causes me to start moving a lot more. It causes me to actually start asking questions that sometimes I feel uneasy asking, or I know that it will create some level of conflict. So I'll ask questions like, okay, so what's the future for me in this company? Like, what does growth actually look like? Like, I mean, we've spoken about this. This has not happened. Why has this not happened? Like, when are we doing this? How are we moving towards this? And whatever. And some of those questions are difficult questions, and some of the conversations themselves are quite awkward and they're quite difficult. But now, because I go and I frame it towards something that I'm actually willing to fight for, now it changes the entire dynamic. Now I'm willing to be forceful. Now the awkwardness of the conversation becomes something that I'm willing to actually deal with, because now I'm speaking on behalf of something that I actually care about. And so that might be something that might be worth doing if you are in the job market or you're busy with reviews and whatever else. Is you might not be good at arguing for yourself, but if you look at the value that you bring to the organization and perhaps tie that to something or someone that you actually are willing to fight for, then you come back and you realize, oh, wait, if I don't fight for this, if I don't fight for more money, if I don't fight for a higher compensation, if I don't fight for this promotion, if I don't push for this, if I don't take this new degree program or whatever else, then I cannot give this person this life I really want to give them. And then I cannot do these things that I really want to do for this person that I say I love or whatever else. And once you have it framed in that way, you become a lot more forceful. You become a lot more willing to have those awkward conversations, those difficult conversations, whether it's with a boss, a recruiter, and whatever. So now you're no longer willing to back down, because now there's something else other than you that's on the line that you are actually willing to fight for. You're willing to have those awkward conversations for. And once you start framing it in that way, I think it becomes a lot easier, because I think the salary conversation, whether it's with a current employer or a prospective one, generally will tend to be an awkward one, because sometimes you don't want to lose the opportunity, or you don't want to create a tenuous situation with your employer. But once you're able to frame it within the context of this must happen because of whoever it is that you're arguing for, or whoever it is, or whatever it is that you are actually fighting for, then it changes everything for you. And I think that might be something that's worth doing in this time, whether you're in the job market or you're busy with business reviews and whatever else. Build an argument for the value that you're bringing. And then when it comes to having that awkward conversation or that difficult conversation about salary and increases, attach it to something that perhaps isn't you, because sometimes you are not willing to fight for yourself the way that you would for someone else that you care about, or for something else that you care about. And once you can attach that value to something else, you'll see how it actually changes how much fight you actually have within yourself.